welcome to the show. I'm Eddy Kara. I cover film and Canadian politics the way a psychologist would. And this is episode 204 of Real Talk with Eddy Kara. And it is called Canada's on Fire. The opposition's tangled in its own web. Carney's winning by Grand Canyon, and so is Spider-Man. So let's do a roll call of everyone having a worse week than you. Alberta's premier is threatening to enforce the law against the province's own First Nations over a vote on leaving the country their treaties are with. British Columbia's on fire. Pierre Poilievre is at war with his own party. And Doug Ford has hit that special stage of scandal where nobody can remember which one is the jet and which one is the $300 million loan anymore. Because at this point, it's not just 4 stories. It's one story wearing 4 outfits. Mark Carney, meanwhile, is sitting at 66% doing absolutely nothing except not being any of those guys. So welcome to episode 204. Let's get started. Stick around because we're actually ending on a good note. My genuinely positive Eddy's Final Cut review of Spider-Man Brand New Day. Because after 5 segments of Canadian political chaos, we all deserve a movie that doesn't make us angry. So let's get into it. Alberta and the Reckoning Nobody's scheduled. Premier Danielle Smith is holding a referendum on October 19th of this year. Question 10 asks Albertans whether the province should start the legal process toward a future binding vote on separation. Not the separation itself, just a question whether to hold it. She says she personally supports staying in Canada. She also is the one who scheduled the vote on leaving it. Here's what should be leading every newscast in this country. Danielle Smith was asked directly what happens if First Nations communities engage in civil disobedience over this referendum. And she said, sit with this, that the law will be enforced. Not, we'll sit down and let's talk, we'll sort it out, or not even, we understand the concern. The law will be enforced. Against the people whose treaties predate Alberta's existence as a province, by the way. Over a vote about whether Alberta gets to leave the country those treaties were signed with. She's threatening law enforcement against the original signatories of this land over a referendum on leaving the country their treaties are with. Try saying that sentence twice. 10 questions. 9 were already controversial. Immigration, election security, constitutional grievances. On May 21st, Smith also added the 10th question. Alberta should remain a province of Canada versus starting the legal process toward a future binding vote to leave. It's non-binding. She's called 50% plus 1 the threshold. Angus Reid has 60% of Albertans saying they'd vote no to the actual question. 67% wanting to stay in a simpler hypothetical. And 51% saying that the official question is just plain too confusing. And that confusion isn't a drafting accident. Cyclins, group identity theory. This isn't primarily a policy story. It's a group identity threat story. When a group's identity feels threatened, people stop doing cost-benefit math and start doing loyalty math. Alberta has real grievances, such as equalization, pipelines, energy policy that feels designed in Toronto and not Alberta. Smith translated those policy grievances into an identity grievance. Let's reform equalization suddenly became, they don't respect who we are. You can argue with a policy, but keep in mind, you cannot argue with someone else's sense of who they are. And that's the whole play. And it's why 56% of Albertans say she's handled this poorly. Yet she keeps going anyway. At an unrelated news conference at Calgary Airport in June, Smith was asked what happens if First Nations engage in civil disobedience. Her answer, "I hope it doesn't come to that." Then she pointed straight at Alberta's Critical Infrastructure Defence Act, the law that penalizes people who block railways, highways, even pipelines, and actually said, quote, "I think you saw how serious we are about enforcing that law as we have many times over previous years." That's not hypothetical. That's a premier pointing at a statute with real penalties and saying, "Try us." Treaty 8 Grand Chief Trevor Mercredi didn't blink when he said, quote, "There can be no decisions about Alberta separating without consultation and consent of our First Nations." He said if it comes to it, they'll get in the way of the industry, taking it to the highways. Smith says this referendum doesn't trigger the duty to consult. Mercredi says any decision that could lead to a separation absolutely triggers it. That's not just a small disagreement, by the way. That's two sides who don't even agree the Crown's oldest legal obligations that still apply here. Cyclens, procedural justice weaponized in reverse. People don't just want a fair outcome. They want a fair process, a real seat at the table before any decision is made. Smith isn't skipping the process by accident. She's decided that the process doesn't apply at all to this decision. That's not a legitimacy gap. That's a legitimacy refusal. And refusals don't get repaired with just a press release. Cyclens, reactance theory. When people feel a right is being taken from them, they push back even harder, never quieter. The law will be enforced isn't a neutral statement to a population who's already been watching its consultation rights get waved away. It confirms pushing back is the only lever left. And threatening enforcement before anyone's broken any law whatsoever is a pretty efficient way to guarantee it happens. This story was never really about October 19th. It's about whether a government gets to treat its oldest legal relationships in this country as an inconvenience to a ballot question, and whether the law will be enforced comment is a threat you make to your own population or to the people your government's power originates from in the first place. Danielle Smith didn't invent that tension, but she is right now choosing exactly how to handle it. And so far the answer is with a statute number and a straight face. From constitutional brinksmanship in Alberta to a province that's actually on fire. So without further ado, let's head to British Columbia.